Good morning. This is our Sunday school class for this morning for the senior adult class of the Dalton First Church of the Nazarene. It's good to be with you this morning. I hope that you had a wonderful 4th of July and maybe you ate some hot dogs or had a good time with family. I know that because of the virus that's going around, it's sort of put a damper on things, but Still, we have a lot to be appreciative for this morning. Be thankful to God for our country and for how He's blessed. I know that He's blessed my family and my life, and I can never repay Him for all He's done. This morning we're going to be talking about Nehemiah again. We've been studying the book of Nehemiah for past week or so. We had been in the book of Ezra, which these two both were instrumental in rebuilding the temple and the gates around Jerusalem. And we know that Jerusalem is the city where God put His name. And also God lays claim to Jerusalem. People may claim, it belongs to the Muslims, or it belongs to the Palestinians, or it belongs to the Jews. But actually God says, no, it's mine. He actually is the owner. He owns everything. We should just note that God owns everything. Everything we have is on loan to us. Everything that we have will eventually pass away. But we know that God has a plan that He's going to bring this to pass, that eventually there will be a heavenly Jerusalem that will come down out of heaven and be a city on the earth where God will reign, and we will all see His glory, and we'll all be there together with Him. As we're studying this morning, we know that Nehemiah has been sent by the Persian king Artaxerxes to go back and to rebuild the city of his forefathers. He was probably born in Babylon, and he was there when Babylon was probably captured by the Persians and the Medes. But growing up during that time, he had worked his way up. He had become a confidant probably of the king. He was a king's cupbearer. And from last week, we found out that the king noted that he was such a good organizer, and that he had a heart set to go back and rebuild his home city, that the king sent him along with any of the people that wanted to go. Plus, he also sent probably some soldiers with him, and he wanted to go back and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. Nehemiah was very, to say that he was more or less a person who wanted to see God's will done, and he wanted to rebuild the city. He knew the prophecies concerning the city for the future, that it would be rebuilt, and he wanted to be a part of that. Sometimes it's like that for us, we want to be a part of what God has got going on. And I know that with God, all things always work out for good, and God is always with us and helping us during these times. I'd like to start with a word of prayer too, and I know that there are many out there that are recovering today, and we know that Sister Irma Thompson is back home, from what I read in the I think it was a newsletter the other day. Also, Brother Barry Gay had to have a leg removed. He was in the hospital in Rome. And I went to see him the other day, and Brother Barry could use our prayers. I'm sure there's many out there that we need to pray for this morning, and I don't have a list, and my memory is not as great as it used to be, so I don't mean to leave anybody out. But I just want to start with a word of prayer and pray that God will be with us this morning, and that He will help us to get from this lesson what He has for us. So let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, Lord, we know that, God, you are a God of gods. Lord, that you created us and you created all things. Father, but you're not that far away from us, Lord. You're close to us, Lord. And you don't just throw us here to fend for ourselves, God, but you have a plan. And Lord, that you have a purpose, God, for each and every one that might hear this message this morning. Lord, I pray that you would touch our hearts, God. Lord, and as you used Ezra, we know that he faced many obstacles, Lord. But God, with you, these things can be overcome very quickly. Lord, I lift up those I mentioned this morning, Lord, and pray that you'll be with them especially. And Lord, any others that I might not really know personally or know about their problems, Lord, I pray that you would touch them in a special way. God, that you would help them as we go through this morning, Father, and Lord, help me maybe to say something that's going to touch a heart, Lord, that might draw somebody to you. Lord, we know that when Jesus is lifted up, he said he would draw all men unto him. And Lord, all of these things are pointing to his coming, Lord, and how that the people were preparing. And God, we know that, Father, without Jesus, Lord, we would be miserable, Lord. We would not have any hope in this life, Father. But God, we know that that's not the end, Lord. That in the end, it will be glorious. Lord, the best is yet to come, we believe. Lord, I pray you help me. Give me the words to say. Help me not to dawdle, Lord, but to say the things that need to be said, Lord. And I praise you, and I thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to be reading this morning from the book of Ezra. And it's in actually 3 parts, in chapters 4, 5, and 6. So we'll start off, and again, we know that Ezra has gone back to the city of Jerusalem. He has actually gotten an idea. He has, what we might call, in our language, scoped out the area to see what needed to be done. He went out at night because his idea in the beginning was not to let everybody know what he was doing, but he had to find out what needed to be done. So he had checked out the outer walls, saw that the outer walls, the gates had been burnt, the outer walls had been broken down in places, and it needed to be repaired because he looked at this as being a disgrace to God, actually, because here was God's city, and it was in ruins, it was in disrepair. But I know if you've ever tried anything for God, or you've ever tried to do anything that's worthwhile, it seems like it's the hardest thing in the world to get done because there's so much opposition. When you're doing it for God, first of all, Satan puts up opposition against you. And then he stirs up people to stand against you. And he'll try to do everything in his power. It's like with Jesus, when Jesus was about to start his ministry, and he had been fasting 40 days in the wilderness. It said that Satan came to him and started to tempt him. And you can read about this in Matthew and Luke, about how that the devil come to him, and maybe in Mark also, about how that the devil come to him and tried to thwart his ministry. What better time to stop it than right at the beginning? Because if you can get someone on the wrong path at the beginning, then the whole thing will be kind of worthless. And it will not bring glory to God. But because Ezra was a man of prayer, Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a man of prayer, and he believed God, and he believed in his purpose that God had sent him. Then he was able to stay on track and to do those things. But he had opposition from outside, and that's what we're going to be starting with. starting with Nehemiah 4:1-9, it said, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, what are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what they are building, even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stones. Then Nehemiah begins to pray, and he says, hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of builders. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height. For the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. The person that starts talking about here is a person named Sanballat, who is one of the governors of the provinces. The Persians had actually divided up the land into provinces. And I'm sure that they tried to use the cities that were there. We read about some of the cities that were there, like the people of Ashdod. We know that the people of Ashdod were the Philistines. That was a Philistine city. The Arabs were to the I think it was the south, which was another group of people that were against it, because basically, if Jerusalem were to be rebuilt, it might become a financial center, and in fact, it would become a center for Jewish people, because that's where they would go back to offering their sacrifices at the temple. That's where they would meet, and as you recall it from the older part of the scriptures, that they were told by God to have feasts there, so there would be a great gathering in of Jews from all over the world at that time, if they could come. I mean, they would come there for the Jewish festivals. And we know that this was something also that needed to be done and set up in order for Jesus to come at the time that he did. But Sanballat and the other leaders, now Sanballat was like the governor or procurator maybe of Samaria. Tobias was from Ammon, which these are to the east of Jerusalem, and probably to the north and east of Jerusalem. So they were surrounded on all sides by people that didn't want to see this happen. And the first thing they did was they began to ridicule the people, call them feeble Jews, and what are they trying to do, and look what they're trying to do it with. I mean, the stones have been burned, and I don't know if you've ever seen burned stones, but one thing about stones, especially when they come under intense heat, they begin to crack and crumble, and there's just no strength to them. And they were saying, well, they're going to try to build this out of rubble, and there was some truth to that anything, if something's built out of very weak material, then even as Tobias said, a fox getting up on it would cause it to fall down. But we also know that the people who were rebuilding this were not necessarily masons. They weren't people that were skilled in the ability to use maybe some type of mortar or something, some type of rock. But they were doing what they could. They took what they had, and I'm sure that they were able to get some other stones too. But they thought that they would build it back. I read in the Illustrated Bible Life that one of the when they did the excavations, some of the archaeologists over there, they began to look at some of the old buildings, the walls, and they said they were not very strong. They were probably strong enough to keep out a lot of things, but they weren't as strong as the rock that was used in the later date to build the walls around Jerusalem. And walls do work. Even in our day and time, the Jews, from the time that Israel became a nation again back in 1948, they suffered a lot of terrorists. And terrorists over there today would go in and have on belts or bombs strapped to them, and they would go into Jewish places, set these bombs off, and try to kill as many Jewish people as they could. Well, Israel has built a wall now to where there's only certain places that people can go through, and they are checked for bombs, so terrorists cannot easily get into Jerusalem. Our country also we're building a wall at the southern border right now that is going to keep out illegals, not so much illegal as drug and human traffickers. And if you don't know that this is really a problem in the United States right now, you should do a little research and find out what's going on in the United States. It's not as pretty as what we would hope. Our country is under attack. It's always been under attack by demonic forces. There's also other forces out there, and I believe they are led by Satan. There's Marxism, there's many other things that are happening today. And it's up to us as Christians to stand against these things. We talk about spiritual battle. This was as much a spiritual battle in Nehemiah's day as it is today, because Satan does not want to see anything good for God. And that's the reason why our president has so much trouble, is because he is a praying man. He is a man that believes God. And he is doing a lot of good for our country, but he is being fought at every turn. Here they were trying to build a wall. They're trying to build a wall around Jerusalem, and they're being, not only, when the insults don't stop it, that's the first thing they hurl is insults. Then they begin to talk about getting armies together to go and stop them. Well, we know that they talked about this, and they may have even raised armies. There may have been some attacks, but Nehemiah was ready for those, and he began to have soldiers guard, not only soldiers, but he had the people at times to sleep close by where they were working. He also had it set up so that there was a trumpet in case they saw trouble coming. Then they could rise up and fight off the attackers. But prayer was primarily the weapon that Nehemiah used. He would go to God. We know the prayer works. That prayer is one of the weapons that God gives us. When you read in Ephesians chapter 6 about the whole armor of God and putting on the whole armor of God, he ends that section of Scripture by saying, and praying always. We should always be praying, because we're in a fight. We are in a fight in our day and time also. Nehemiah chapter 5, 1 through 5, verses 1 through 5. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and vineyards belong to others. So not only was there the outside trouble that Nehemiah was having to face, but there was also an inside trouble. First of all, there was a famine. There was not a lot of food, so they were having to sell their lands to others, and mostly to rich Jews who were charging interest. And I read in our Bible Illustrated Life that at that time the interest in some cases was 75%, which is ridiculous because the Jews were not supposed to charge interest to their countrymen anyway. This was part of the Old Testament laws. So these people are not, the rich people were taking advantage of the poor people here. And not only was food one of the things that they had to worry about, but also there was taxes, the king's taxes. One thing that you'll know about, the old saying is, there's only two things for sure in life, and that's death and taxes. If we pay taxes these days, but we do have some good that comes out of that. I mean, hopefully we have protection by our police and our government. We have laws that are enforced by these people. We need those things. I mean, that's one thing about our society. Back then, they were having to pay to the Persian government, and that's how it would run. I mean, whenever someone would take over a land, a lot of times they would set up a government there, and they would procure taxes to help run the countries or the local provinces. They were taxed for many reasons, I'm sure, just the same as we are today. But these people were having trouble paying the taxes because they weren't making a lot of money and there wasn't a lot of food, and they were having to actually turn their children over as slaves to some of these people, some of the rich Jewish people, in order to survive and to be able to stay there, during this time. Nehemiah did, if you read some of the other chapters that we don't cover, Nehemiah did go to these rich people and talk to them, and they reversed that trend because they realized that they were not in God's will. One thing about the rebuilding of the temple, the walls and things, this was all part of God's will, that all of this could be set in place because eventually Jesus would come to Jerusalem and offer himself as their Messiah. Nehemiah 6:14 through 16, we have sort of the culmination of what was done. It said, "Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God," he's praying here, "because of what we have done. Remember also that the prophet Noadiah and how she and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me." So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. When our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence. because they realized that this work had been done with the help of God. So evidently, not only had Tobiah and Sanballat physically been trying to stop the work, but they had been spiritually trying to stop the work, or through the use of prophets, prophetess, they were prophesying that this wouldn't, this wasn't God's will and things. And but when they had finished, when Nehemiah and the people that finished building the walls, they began to realize that maybe God was behind this. Sometimes it takes a while for people to realize what is God's work. As you recall in the New Testament, there was a time in Acts where they were trying to stop the apostles from spreading the gospel. But some of the more wise Jews that were on the council of the Sanhedrin said, if this is of God, you can't stop it. And they were the wise ones, although throughout the first few centuries, Christianity was trying to be stopped by the way of persecution and many other things that were done to try to halt Christianity and bring it to a grinding halt. Now, it was sort of slowed down a lot, but we won't get into that this morning, as there really, there were many reasons why it come to a slowdown, I should say. But we're all faced with challenges, and especially if we try to do something for God. I think one of the hardest things for me to do when I first got saved was to convince my dad that this was God's will, that God was with me, because my grandfather on my mother's side had been a Christian. He was a staunch Christian. I mean, he really was a hard man. I mean, he didn't believe in anything that we might consider foolishness these days or anything. And he blew the Bible. He taught the Bible. They said that you couldn't ask him a question without him giving you something from the Bible. And after he died, when I started seeking God and I got closer and closer to God, I began to say things to my dad, and he looked at me and he said, I thought we had buried him. And he would kind of ridicule things I would do, but I didn't let that stop me. But it did change some things about how I went about what I was doing. I did seek God. I did go, I would travel many miles to hear a message that I thought I needed to hear from God. But yet, just the point that my dad didn't go wholehearted with me and tried to stop me might have, in some ways, been a good thing, but you always wish that the people that you really care about would go wholeheartedly with you. In fact, it's one of the hardest things is when you really come to Christ and you begin to try to do His will and try to follow His will for your life, that not everybody's going to be happy about it. There are going to be those that will try to stop you. There are going to be those that will tell you, well, you don't have to do that. It's sort of like when the devil tried offering Jesus so much if he would bow down and worship him. I've talked to people that said the devil had made them offers like that and tried to get them to stop doing what they were doing for God. And they said, devil, I'm not listening. I'm going to follow God. And here we see that because Nehemiah followed God and he didn't listen to those that came against him. He didn't listen to the prophets who were false prophets. He didn't listen to Sanballat or Tobias or any of the others, but he listened to God and he prayed to God that because of him being steadfast and doing God's will, they had the walls built in 52 days, which was miraculous. I don't know what the walls look like. There's no pictures from back then, so we really don't we have to look into our imagination to try to find out how bad it was, but we do know that it was not good. But they fought, they prayed, and God gave them just a miracle in 52 days. And when the others, the ones that had been trying to stop us all this, they realized God was with them. And someday, God will show us exactly where He was with us at times that were hard for us. So when we're going through hard times, God is not lost. God is still there. He's still God. And He's still someone that we can trust when things get tough. Heavenly Father, I thank You this morning for being with us. Lord, maybe something that was said will touch a heart, Lord. We know that when Jesus lifted up, He will, as He said, draw men unto Himself. And Lord, I just pray that someone hearing this today, maybe, Lord, will either renew their faith or they will come to faith for the first time, Lord. I thank You and praise You in Jesus' name.